Well, hi again, folks. Mr. Bleeker here. In this lesson, we'll focus on the cardiac cycle. And by the cardiac cycle, what I'm talking about is the electrical system of the heart. Now, you might have seen this before. There it is in the background. This is what we call an EKG. This is an electrical profile of what's going on when your ventricles and your atria contract. Now, when you look at this, it's got a repetitive pattern. It sort of begins here and then starts again over here. But the easiest way to judge a heartbeat is you could go from ventricular contraction to ventricular contraction, or from peak to peak. And I'm going to explain this in a lot more detail in this lesson, and you'll be able to look at an EKG and actually understand this rhythm. So we've got a lot to do, so let's get to it. Okay, here we go. Let's see if I can get my stylus back on. All right, there we go. An electrocardiogram does profile the electrical activity of the heart, and when you're studying it in that waveform, we're going to study the P wave, what's called the QRS, and then this last one, the T wave. It'll all make sense by the end of this, I promise. So when your heart fires, your atria have to go first. So what's interesting is the right side of the heart is where the signal is initiated. Now this is called your SA node. And that's right there. That's your sinoatrial node. Okay, the way of remembering this is a sinus in the atrium. And it's the firing of this little sort of nerve cluster, if you want to think of it. This electrical impulse will cause the atria to fire. And I think it's best if we look at an animation of that, because I got a really good one for you. Here it is. Make sure we're muted there. So here's your SA node right there. So it initiates contraction, and there's sort of a highway system between the two atria, because the atria should fire at approximately the same time. So you can see that the SA node initiates a signal. Once the SA node, actually I want to go there. Once the SA node does its initial firing, this is when the atria contract kind of in concert. Now what happens when the atria contract? Well, they send blood down into the ventricles. They send it down through this is the tricuspid valve in the right side of the heart. This is the bicuspid valve in the left side of the heart. The atria are kind of interesting. They're two little flappy chambers on top of the heart, and their job is to receive the blood and get it down to the ventricles where it needs to go. So the SA node will start that signal, informs the other atrium, hey, buddy, you need to fire too. And then we have to think about, how do we alert the ventricles? The ventricles should not be going first. Makes sense. Get the atria to fire first, and then send a signal down through this little pathway here, they call the internodal pathway, down to another node. You can think of this as an amplifier. It's going to receive the signal, and this is called the AV node, or the atrioventricular node. So it takes a signal from the atria, and it sends that signal down to the ventricles. These are nerve fibers, by the way, folks. You can think of it as electrical cabling, an apt descriptor. But you have to know all the parts. So SA node, okay, down to the AV node. This is a major electrical pathway, and it goes right down through the septum of the heart. This septum is what gives us a four-chambered heart. It's what is absent or not fully sealing, is another way of thinking of it. When you look at frogs and some of the sort of the I don't like to call them lower, but the lower reptiles, they don't seal off the ventricles like we do. Anything with a four-chambered heart has this fully active septum, and that's why we have a two-chambered, or sort of rather we have a double pump system. where the right side of the heart is supplying blood to the lungs and the left side is sending it out to the body. Now you notice I circled this as right side because that's how it sits in your chest. Remember, you're looking down at it, but you have to pretend that it's in your chest. So, right, left is right and right is left. It's all about perspective. Now, this bundle of His is wiring that will send the signal down. You can see it punching way down into the ventricles here, but you've got to get that signal all the way over to this muscle. So the bundle of His is like major fiber, and the Purkinje fibers get the signal to the rest of the ventricular muscle where it needs to go. And then the ventricles will fire. Now, what happens when the ventricles fire? Well, in the right side of the heart, you send blood to the lungs. In the left side of the heart, you send yummy renewed blood to the body. You send it out through the aorta. Now let's see what this looks like. Here's conduction. Again, there's your SA node. And you can see now that the atria are going to fire. That atrial pathway's been activated. And blood will surge down into your ventricles. And a moment later, when the signal's picked up by the AV node, there's a little bit of a delay, and that's good because you need to let the atrial fire, then the ventricles get to go. This is a long delay. It's not that long in real life. And there's a signal that goes down through the bundle of His to the Purkinje fibers, and we get contraction of the ventricles. Pretty good animation. When the heart pumps, by the way, a lot of people think it just compresses on itself. But if you've think about it, this is a very interesting thing. When you wring out a towel, you don't just squeeze it. You squeeze it and you twist it. That's the most effective way to get all of the water out of a towel. Turns out that's exactly what a heart does, but it took us a long time to figure out that the heart did it. The heart compresses and then twists on itself a little bit to just move its entire fluid volume out. It's kind of amazing that our hearts can put up with that, but they do, and they do it well. Go back here. There we go. And I'll go to full screen. Fewer distractors that way. And your notes are just a summary of this, where the SA node alerts. Well, the SA node will cause both of these atria to more or less fire. Okay, so I just sort of scribbled it in. And then the AV node, kind of an amplifier with a little bit of a delay, picks up the signal, sends a signal down the bundle of His, right here, to the Purkinje fibers, right here, and then we get ventricular systole, right, or contraction. Now, they've got some interesting terms for this. When the muscle squeezes, we say it's depolarizing. And when the muscle relaxes, that's repolarizing. So it's kind of a distinction that you want to make. Is this on the test? Absolutely. You do have to know this. Biology 12, practically medical school, right? Well, at least in BC. Here's a nice visualization, right, of the AV node sending its signal down. And then finally, on the right, there you go, the big contraction happens like that. That's good. Now, you can see a lot of problems that could develop with this. In the electrical system of the heart, if we have issues with the heart, right here, for example, if the SA node isn't sending out the signals properly, or if there's an issue with the AV node, well, we can look into something called a pacemaker. And in certain cases of heart arrhythmias, problems with the beat pattern, what you'll do is you'll use a pacemaker to basically set up the conductive pattern so that the atria fire first, and then in time, a split instant later, the ventricles will go. So pacemakers are, when you go through the airport, that's not something you want to go through an airport scanner with, because last thing I think you want to disrupt is the electrical pacemaker device that they implant. Obviously, the machinery can really wreak havoc upon it. Now, here's the electrocardiogram that we were looking at, and we should take a peek here. And let's write in the specific sort of terminology or the labeling. So this right here is called the P wave, and that's when your atria fires. And then I'll try to accurately do this. At these points here, each of the points gets a letter. So we say this is the Q, this is the, oops, this is the R, and I just need to erase because I was getting ahead of myself there. And this is the S. Now, you can see that this is quite an event. This is a big surge. Well, if this is your atrium right here, which I'll just call AT, like that, then this event, QRS, right there, is when your ventricle fires. And it's a pretty big event. In fact, when we hook up the leads to your body, when your ventricles fire, it's about 1 millivolt of a discharge, and that's enough to be picked up with some sensors. In fact, we can sense the fraction of a millivolt of your atria firing too. And there's this last little bump here you might have noticed, this guy right here, and that is when your ventricle recovers or repolarizes, and it's enough to detect because it's such a large muscle that we can sense it recharging. Now it takes basically when you look at a heartbeat, it's kind of a way of a way of thinking about it is it goes from about here to here, and that takes in a lot of people, like if you're in good shape, you have about 1 heartbeat per second. A lot of people have 2 per second, which is kind of what they're showing down here. And the reason why people that are in shape have a lower heart rate is because the volume of the heart is greater, and the heart is able to pump blood to the entire body more effectively. And the bigger your heart, the lower your basically your heart rate will be. Think of it as this way: the pump can send the blood to the entire body just more effectively. It's a good way to consider it. So you don't need to pump as often, right? The octopus below, I thought this was kind of fascinating as a graph. An octopus has the same wave pattern as we do. It shows a degree of relation with us. You can see that the discharge of basically when the ventricles fire, you don't see it going upwards of a millivolt. It's just a fraction of that. It's pretty neat stuff nonetheless. There we go. I've given you this one, and this shows how we get ventricular depolarization will go upwards of a millivolt. And I did have a student ask me about this. It's like, well, why is this positive and why is this negative? Okay, well, when the muscle fires, we pick up the voltage, and that's a positive potential difference. Now, when the muscle recharges, it's in the opposite direction. So you will see sort of recovery, and that's like it's building up its potential energy again, and that is right here. So this your atria is fired here, and it's sort of oops, that's not very good. It's fired and it's all tuckered out, right? This is your atrium. That's the max it could do, and then it comes back down and it kind of recovers right about at that point. Now, when your ventricle fires, it's all tuckered out right here. It's done everything it can, and it's got to recover. And if you look down here at the S, the S moment in the wave, your ventricle cannot fire. It's so tired. It's right here. It's what we call hypopolarized. It literally can't do anything at this time. It has to wait. It has to recover until basically its chemical energy is renewed. So there are points where your heart just can't fire. It's just too tuckered out. And those really for the atria, that would be at the P moment there. We'll call it the P moment. And for the ventricle, really from R until it gets R, it's done everything it can, and as the voltage dives, that's because it's recovering, and it's like deep recovery Don't ask it to do anymore. It's already fired. The T wave is interesting because it's right here. It's when your ventricles repolarize. They have enough juice to fire again, and it's quite a recovery. So we pick it up, and it's a little bit. You go a little bit above its sort of starting resting potential, right? The resting potential is basically hugging 0 millivolts, right? When it discharges, we get upwards of a millivolt, and when it recovers, we head in the other direction into basically negative voltage. Okay, there we go. Just one more shot. I thought I'd include it. Now it's fully labeled this time. So on a test, please tell me that this is the atrium firing, and tell me that this is the ventricle firing, and then over here, tell me this is when the ventricles all recovered and ready to go again. Okay? Really, that's one heartbeat from here to here. And now that you've seen the pattern, if you see when you, for example, you visit someone in the hospital and you take a look at their EKG, you can look at it, and if the pattern doesn't look like this, or doesn't sort of resemble this, or you get the waves, they're really out of sync, you know there's something going on with the function of the heart. So now you'll know a little bit more. Okay, components of the blood. That tells me that I need to sneak back out and show you one last thing, and we'll call it a lecture. On the course site, there is this little doodad here, and it's a really neat animation. When on the course site, it is, where do we have it? Circulatory system, and believe it's item 6. It's either item 5 or item 6, but it's open, so we'll look at it now. And this is kind of neat because what it shows, we can have blood flow on, or we can look at the electrical discharge of the heart. There's your SA node, AV node, and you can watch the electrical discharge, and you can see the valves open and close. Right? There's the atria sending their blood load, for example, and if you watch the AV node, you'll see just a moment later, there you go, there's the ventricles contracting. This is a good way to test yourself, by the way. You ask yourself, what's going on as this is happening? You can pause the animation. That's what it's for, so use it. You'll also see heart sounds. And one thing I wanted to point out is your heart makes a lub-dub sound. Now, the lub-dub sound, a lot of people think that the first sound, the lub-dub, I know it's a bad imitation, but I'll go with it. The lub is actually the opening of the atrioventricular valves. So when these open and when they snap shut, you sort of hear that lub. But there's a louder sound. There's a louder one afterwards, like lub dub. And the dub sound is when the semilunar valves, basically the valves that let the blood out to the lungs and out through the aorta, when those snap shut, you hear the loud dub. So it's commonly misunderstood, right? The lub is an atrial event, and the dub is a ventricular event, but the sound is made by the snapping of the valves. So there's your lub, and there's your dub. Okay, you heard it here. And if you watch the electrocardiogram right here, it's kind of in sync with the heart sounds. And you see every time we get a ventricular contraction, right, you'll see, boom, you'll see it gets really noisy. And that's because that's the dub. It's the louder of the two. So it's kind of neat to check this out. With the blood flow on, it's great. You can turn the labels off. You can turn the labels on. And it's a really good way to get to know things because, there's your superior vena cava, there's your aorta, right? Pulmonary trunk, that just leads up to the pulmonary arteries. There we go, leading to lungs. It's a good animation. It's a good way to quiz yourself. So I'll just stop this now and say that's it. That's the cardiac cycle. I hope you enjoyed it. I didn't go into too much detail. In nursing school, you would have to know a lot more about the millivoltages on the graph, but you know what? We don't need to go into that amount of detail. So I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good one, folks.